George Fischer was one of the editors of the Watchtower magazine. And in April 1924, he writes a letter and says, hey, I'm going to temporarily withdraw. The claim is that it was a health issue. The correspondence we see afterwards indicates that this wasn't the case. He did have health issues, of course, and that's what ultimately killed him shortly after this. But
yeah, so he wasn't making that up, because he did die shortly after that. So
it was stressing him out. It was a stressful situation. He died of a heart attack, reading out of the book of Hebrews. But there was also some disagreements between him and others at the society. And so he was just stepping out of the situation. And what was that stressful situation? Here in this April 27th, 1926 letter by Fischer, there's some accusations in here about Judge Rutherford and a threat to disfellowship him. I had this translated into English from a friend of mine that lives in Germany, so I had to make sure that it was absolutely correct. Penton's books, Jehovah's Witnesses in the Third Reich and Apocalypse Delayed, literally one paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
And they mentioned this document, but it's not in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I had never seen this document until a couple months ago. The writer of this pamphlet basically says, I can no longer hold my silence. Something's got to be said. They were setting up to have a disfellowship trial. There were 2 or 3 witnesses, right? And 2 or 3 witnesses means you went and talked directly to the person. The person didn't listen to you. Then you had 2 or 3 witnesses, and they still didn't want to listen to you. So they were going to have a church trial, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those 2 or 3 witnesses were going to support it.
For clarification, for what Jeff's saying, back then, that's how they did it. They didn't just, you go to a bunch of elders and they seal your fate. Back then, if it wasn't agreed upon, the whole ecclesia,
the whole congregation was involved.
Made it a point to determine so that no bias could take place. So either you had everybody behind you or not, and it's the whole, not this, it's the sum of the whole, not just a few people, which is probably a good way to do it.
Yeah, it's a good way to do it. Both sides could give their story, and the entire congregation could hear the evidence on both sides, and the entire congregation decides the outcome, not just 5 elders in a back room somewhere, and then they never tell anyone what happened. That isn't a scriptural proposition. Here in this April 27th letter by Fischer that's published here, it says, on the Wednesday evening before memorial, Brother J.F. Rutherford, accompanied by 2 elders and a sister, attended the Paris edition of the notorious show Artists and Models in L. Jolson's Winter Garden Theater on Broadway, New York. The chief attraction of this burlesque show is the exhibition of nude women on the stage. It is generally known as notoriously offensive against decency and public morals. So the March 25th, 1925 Golden Age has an article called Eruptions Elsewhere. They start talking about Fischer. And they say basically, well, but Brother Fischer has not been himself since the summer of 1922. That was at Cedar Point Convention, right? Suspicion and bitterness against Judge Rutherford have been increasingly apparent. Twice the editor has brought about reconciliation between these 2 great men and one-time devoted friends. On both occasions, the happy re-established relations were broken by Brother Fischer's own unwisdom. At length, a doctrinal difference manifested itself, and further reconciliation was impossible. The letter isn't a doctrine.
Once again, it's somebody else's fault, and you're writing history the way you deemed it to be correct.
It wasn't a doctrinal difference.
Exactly, on top of it.
Going to a burlesque is a doctrinal difference? That's quite an unusual response for the accusation that was made.
Mm-hmm. A false flag, more or less is what.
Or a diversion, perhaps.
Yeah.
So in the May 4th, 1927 Golden Age, again it says, hey, the charge in Fischer's letter is grossly false and libelous. He is dead, as you know. I have it from Judge Rutherford's own lips. He never saw L. Jolson in his life and doesn't know what he looks like.
But
But
he
he's too
was
busy.
accused of going to see Al Jolson.
The
So-
accusation wasn't going to see L. Jolson.
So how did that even get in there?
That's a really good question.
I mean, the subject was totally breached.
Yeah.
He was brought on charges of going to see something indecent with women, and here they say he never saw Al Jolson.
So,
Well, again, he didn't go see Al Jolson. And as you said earlier, when these letters were written, there were more than one witness. There were two or more witnesses. He followed the protocol, and without being there, one of them's lying.
and do you really want to write about somebody like this after they've died?
Mm-hmm.
They can no longer defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody knew who L. Jolson was, especially if he lived in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather please you.
All the Broadway shows,
Anybody I know.
L. Jolson. The first talking motion picture, The Jazz Singer, was started with L. Jolson's voice. He was the main character in the movie. I think that was 1927, just shortly after this. Jolson was a very famous guy, especially for those who lived in New York.
We'll add it for another discussion, but Rutherford liked the New York life. He was out and about town, and it was pretty well documented by Bible students because they didn't approve of him going out. His defense from what they were saying in the past was, well, he's got to be seen, make the society prominent and whatnot. But a lot of them didn't approve of what he was doing. And Russell certainly did not do that. Okay, why didn't the other two witnesses step forward?
That's a really good question. So in this letter, so it's talking about Rutherford. He says, if my experience had shown me that Rutherford was sincere and truthful, I would have answered him more broadly. But he's not sincere and not truthful, for there's no use in answering his letter, as he would twist my letter as much as he did when he published my letter in a twisted manner in the Watchtower. I want to keep my mouth shut with a muzzle while the outlaw is in front of me. So that you are well informed, I will attach the names of the brothers to you. The facts are as follows. And that was a favorite Rutherford phrase, right? Brother Brackenbury was an elder of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in Providence, Rhode Island. Even though he was married and father of a son, he paid his attention to his sister Stone. This Brother Brackenbury continued to maltreat his wife cruelly so that she divorced. After the divorce, this brother immediately wanted to marry Sister Stone, but fellow elder Brother Whitford made him attentive to the prohibition of the Lord Jesus Christ in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Brackenbury replied that no one had talked him into this private affair. So what did they do? Brother Whitford and a few brothers turned to President Rutherford. Now Rutherford issued a sharp letter against Whitford, asking him to apologize to Brackenbury before the whole assembly for mingling with foreign affairs. Of course, this was due to the command to the Lord of the Elder. So instead of following the scriptural advice, Rutherford told him to mind his own business.
For his friend who he more or
With
less...
the burlesque, yeah.
So it's like getting permission from the Pope to absolve a marriage.
Yeah.
It's really what it kind of boiled down to when you think about it.
Bethel Program Yates also became fed up with his wife, a sincere sister in Christ, and fell in love with a young sister, also divorced through the support of President Rutherford, and then married this young sister. Testimony: former elder of the New York Assembly, Brother Ostrander, and abandoned Sister Yate. Because of these and more serious incidents, which I could not tolerate, as director and editor appointed by Brother Russell, I was also hunted out of office and assembly by the president. And so this is Fischer writing. He knew of these cases where Rutherford wasn't following scriptural principle, and it was getting to the point where people were just afraid to combat him. Rutherford had complete control. And that's why I think the two witnesses didn't step forward after Fischer's death.
Yeah, I was there, but I don't know for sure if that was him. It could have been an imposter, So, I mean, it is what it is. People do what they do, on their own. However, when you're the head of the organization, you don't just absolve and dissolve and bless and go that route either. And and as we talk in the future on another discussion, there's plenty of people from Bible students who came forward with this stuff. It's not just that in this instance here, we're talking with Fischer. And so why didn't the other two witnesses come forward after Fischer died?
Guess who gets disfellowshipped and cast out of the organization? The ones who are trying to stand for scriptural principle. Rutherford's friends got
and that would make sense why the other witnesses didn't step forward. They didn't want to be disfellowshipped.
Yeah, it seems from the evidence presented here that any disagreement with Rutherford wouldn't be met with scriptural advice, but with however Rutherford wanted it to.
Like Olin.
Yeah.
And he actually won the lawsuit, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
When you took it out of his court and presented the facts, a whole different outcome.
One of those few cases that the Watchtower Society lost, and rightfully so. A future discussion for a future time. Brother Fischer has not been himself since the summer of 1922. That convention in Cedar Point. Suspicion and bitterness against Judge Rutherford have been increasingly apparent. Twice the editor has brought about reconciliations between these two great men and one-time devoted friends. First of all, they mentioned people.
They avoided the subject.
They're avoiding the subject, and they mention by specific names. And Rutherford did this a lot. If you've heard of the Olin Moyle discussion, where he slandered Moyle in the magazine, there's a lot of wolves in sheep clothing that are making the same accusations, and it's all lies, basically what they're saying. And there's imposters.
Okay.
That's a real defense. How did Rutherford react to this? They were set up to have the disfellowship trial, and Fischer died of a heart attack suddenly at his table.
So basically, because of Fischer, the society had to keep Rutherford and lost an Ezekiel book in like one shot there. So it's like you wonder, had he lived, where all this would have went. I'm certain the personalities involved and how they acquired the legal entities, they would have squashed this accusation anyway.
Just to show that the enterprise remained neutral, they published George Fischer's obituary. And it also says here that he gave Pearson's funeral sermon. He was a member of the Pastoral Bible Institute. So it shows that although they were aligned with the society, they still were quite neutral until the very end. So their abrupt ending in 1928, maybe it was because of their neutrality. So that shows that the enterprise remained semi-neutral, whereas the society is avoiding everything related to Fischer, cutting him completely out of the Finnish mystery, right? But the enterprise says, no. Here's the good stuff Fischer did, and this is how he died. And this letter was published more than once in English and in German, and it was spread around. So instead of dealing directly with the person that's spreading the accusation, he just slandered the people that were spreading it in the magazine by name, in the Golden Age magazine by name.
Which the Golden Age was the modern day Awake. Right. At the time. So for those who might not have known.
And the response to it is interesting.
It says, it is firm conviction of the editor. Once again, they have a firm conviction that Brother Fischer is deceived into thinking on top of it. So it's a lot of words to divert and change. And nobody knows what really happened now at this point, and they're thinking it's for something else.
So Rutherford's answer to the charge here basically is, well, I'm too busy to deal with it. Rutherford even did this with other people later on in the Watchtower and the Golden Ages as well. He slandered other people specifically by name. Olin Moyle case is one of the very famous ones. And I think it was Moyle who said, Rutherford is bringing in liquor illegally and doing all these things. And that was during Prohibition.
In a Rolls Royce.
Possibly.
I mean, well, going back, if you look at it, you read what the responses was, I heard from his own lips. But right before that, it says that Rutherford was the object of all kinds of devil's malicious charges. So even back then, every attack was from the devil, not from, hey, I saw you somewhere where you shouldn't be in your position. It was a malicious devil attack. So, and then, like you said, you go back into it, and here we go. Oh, well, wait, you just said you weren't there. So, I mean, it is kind of comical when you think of it.
I tend to think of Mirror Universe, Star Trek, but, there you have it. In the appendix to this article, now this is the writer of the German paper, years after Fischer died. Remember, he's writing from Germany. It says, Rutherford has many people on his conscience who not only went back to the world in 1917 and 1924, but also the blood of those who hawked his propaganda articles during the Hitler era.
So he said that falls right into line with what others were accusing the society of doing also.
Yeah.
And a lot of the witnesses don't realize that the society kind of had ties with Hitler to avoid conflict and other things. Very interesting.
To be fair, that was at the beginning. Later, they did stand. Honestly, they did stand against Hitler, but it was later, after Rutherford didn't get what he wanted.
But you don't barter.
They took a stand.
Yeah, you don't barter when you're saying stay neutral, and then you're bartering for favors. You're getting in bed. I mean, it's one or the other.
He finishes this up by saying, "Today, I deeply regret I've been silent for 26 years. The brothers believe to act on 1 Corinthians 13, on love, and have a great deal of responsibility in their silence and their sympathy."
If more people did that over the years, probably a lot of less damage to other people's lives would have taken place over the years.
History, as they say, would be changed, but hindsight's 2020. So after Fischer died, Rutherford decided to publish another version of the Finnish Mystery. And you'll notice a difference between these two editions. One is very, very thick, and one is very thin.
So all the stuff that didn't happen, they took out of the book, or how did that work?
So there's a couple changes to it. Fischer's part of the book, the Ezekiel portion of the book, is completely removed. This is after his death. And I think it was in response to this disfellowship threat.
So
I think it was despite him after he died.
Now the irony of this all is he could have wrote a correct version of what Ezekiel interpretation was, and it got lost in history because they got mad at him for reporting something that he did. So it more or less, that's what it boils down to. That's quite a bit of a book to take out because you don't like someone or they change. I mean, it doesn't change what is true. If what he wrote was correct, I mean, they were willing to print it the first time. What happened the second time when they got mad at him? Did the light change by it? And I'm going to say it again, the comedy involved in it. Here it is. He did all this research. Did they ever, take anything from it? They trusted him enough to write it, and we're going to publish it. What are we not seeing from it, today? It would be interesting to see that stuff.
Now, I have access to some letters, and that's going to be for a future discussion again on the Finnish Mystery, where Rutherford and some of the editors are writing Woodworth and says to Fischer, hey, we don't understand any of this stuff. We're going to give this to you, and you handle this. There's questions about this subject, you handle that. Or, we're asking you to write a clarification on your Ezekiel portion of the book, and you'll see some articles in the early Towers on that subject. Which
leads to a whole other point. They could interpret any way they want
Right.
what they're doing. So it's like, me going to you, Jeff, write this book on Revelation, and I'm going to publish it as gospel for all the followers coming to us. It probably should have been a little more formal and thought out than that.
I think it would have been better if they didn't demand that you had to agree with the book in order to be a teacher in the society or respected in the society. If they could have had some liberality. I heard some stories about how some of the Watchtower studies were conducted before Rutherford's era, where the idea was, hey, come to the meeting, bring your comments for and against the subject, and let it be discussed. What happened to the society from Rutherford's period on?
Unity.
That's a future discussion. Now, as I said, Fischer officiated at Pearson's funeral. He was a member of the Pastoral Bible Institute. Sister Fischer, his wife, there's a convention she attended in 1938, and she's still living in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he lived, or where they lived. And she says, I'm deeply grateful to the Heavenly Father to be able to come to the Pittsburgh Convention. So she left the society as well. I mean, look at how, even after her husband had died, how they were trying to slander his name still after death.
Okay, wrap it up.
Next, we're going to discuss a little more about some of the splinter groups and the push back and forth on doctrinal subjects and how these discussions evolve the society. Thank you again, Paul. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Get a whole story, not just from the Watchtower's perspective, but from all the various splinter groups. What were they saying? So until next time, keep reading.